A palimpsest was a parchment which was used again and again. The writing and images would be rubbed off each time, and when it was reused, some of the tracings would show through from the previous use. Palimpsest is therefore a potent metaphor that is used to express how landscapes accumulate traces of history, where some aspects from the past show through to the present and others are obscured. And we don't always know who was responsible for the different writing we find on the landscape. It all simply becomes part of the everyday environment we find ourselves in. For Christchurch, the palimpsest has been built up from layers of settlement and the activities of the natural landscape. The earthquake has produced a particularly vivid palimpsest, where there are abrupt discontinuities in the age of adjacent elements. Palimpsest is used as a strategy for simultaneously displaying and interpreting layers from the past. The explicit characteristics of each layer can be discerned amongst the melange of ages. Gustafsson Porter's Garden of Forgiveness in Beirut, Lebanon, is still under construction and aims to create a contemplative setting amongst the fragments of centuries of occupation and decades of violence. It includes traces of many prior civilizations on the site, with the various layers appearing throughout the design. Ruins and remnants from past eras can be seen in the garden. The combining of the layers of previous eras creates a rich site for remembering. There are archaeological traces that give clues to the past, as well as elements that change with the seasons, such as planting and springs that flood in winter. Just as good copy editing can dramatically enhance the readability of a text with very minor alterations, so too can good design help the readability of a city. This can be expressed through interventions such as creating emphasis and amplification, or revealing features through the process of subtraction. Editing needs to be approached extremely sensitively, as it should not further erode the already depleted fabric of the city. One of the best exemplars of an edited landscape is the Swiss Way. Designed to commemorate the 700th year of the Confederation of Switzerland, the path is 35 kilometres long and weaves around Lake Erie. A number of artists and landscape architects were involved, including Carmen Perrin's subtle intervention of cleaning one of the erratics, boulders that had been brought there by glaciation. By simply removing the lichens, etc., the boulder's alien status in that landscape was heightened. Landscape architect Georges Descommes created a discrete belvedere called the Champs-Élysées, which framed the view. The belvedere was not so much to be looked at as looked from, and the editing of views is one of the most potent interventions contributing towards effective interpretation and contemplation. The simple decision of where to place a seat can enhance a viewer's engagement with a meaningful scene in the central city, for example, a site of devastation, a site of renewal. Another site which edits the landscape is Paolo Bergi's Geological Observatory, high in the mountains of Switzerland. The circular lookout has a red line running across it, which shows the boundary between the European and African plates, and the small pieces of rock are extracted from the wider landscape, showing the difference in geology that results from the fault line. The handrail also edits the landscape by drawing attention to things in the distance, as though underlining them. The retaining of traces of the past can be the core of a powerful approach to interpretation. Through highlighting these traces in the landscape, they become elevated in significance and act as touchstones for memory. At the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park, the ruins of the only building left standing have been retained as a ruin, and the site is on the UNESCO World Heritage List. The tree that saw everything is a central element of the memorial for the El Al flight that crashed into Belmar in the Netherlands in 1992. As a survivor tree, it is an important symbol and focus for remembering. A fragment of the damaged landscape in Kobe, Japan, was preserved as part of the landscape of remembering. Remains of structures that reflect the violence of the earthquake are possible elements for a memorial. For example, the twisted footbridge across Medway Street, damaged in the September 4 quake, provides a focus for remembering. While such a structure manifests the violence of the event, siting would require careful consideration in order to avoid a conflict with space for contemplation. Footprints of now absent buildings and structures can evoke potent memories. The retention of such elements in a park-like setting allows for the elements to be distinguished from subsequent overlays and read as part of the pre-quake environment. This strategy is effectively used in the interpretation of medieval ruins in Europe, for example at Muckley Abbey in England. Exemplars of a strategy of juxtaposition include the well-known example of Coventry Cathedral, which suffered bombing damage in World War II, but rather than being rebuilt, was kept in its ruined state and complemented by a modern addition. Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church in Berlin also contrasts the ruins of a bombed church tower with a recent addition. The new part of the church was designed by Egon Eiermann and completed in 1963. The musealisation of the archaeological site of Lisbon, St. Jorge Castle Praça Nova in Lisbon, Portugal, by JLCG Architects was completed in 2010. The ancient architectural site is juxtaposed with a contemporary building, which creates a powerful contrast rather than diluting the site through trying to blend in. The interactive media wall designed by the Gibson Group has created a site where citizens of Copenhagen can upload images and touch the screen to interact and move around. The wall can show a range of historic images and provide a constantly changing array of views, rather than a fixed lesson about the past. This is a democratic and participatory history of the city that creates a shared collective narrative, as people can add their own images to the database. Interpretation can also be via handheld devices such as smartphones, using techniques such as augmented reality, which combines virtual images with real views of the city. Narratives of the past, as well as visions of the future, can be an important part of engaging with the changing city. Narratives can also be written into the fabric of the city through doing something as simple as encouraging new buildings to show the date of their construction, providing a timestamp for the post-quake era, as in Napier. One of the most potent ways of remembering the earthquakes is to create a legacy for the future, as in the example of Napier, where the coherent Art Deco landscape has become the distinctive character of the city. A dramatic change in a city can become a wellspring for future generations. Another example is Lisbon, where the 1755 earthquake devastated the city with the loss of 85% of the built form. Rather than rebuild the medieval city, they consciously adopted a very contemporary view of urban form, and this has been a legacy that makes the city one of the most respected in urban design terms. The Toronto Waterfront Park includes many areas created after Hurricane Hazel in 1954 and memorialises those who lost their homes and lives, and also interprets the lesson of the hazards of building on a floodplain. The Disaster Reduction Museum, part of the Disaster Reduction and Human Renovation Institution, was opened in 2002 to commemorate the tragic event and to educate visitors about earthquakes and disaster prevention. The museum includes a large-screen theatre with realistic images of the earthquake's destructiveness, a documentary film about the recovery process, information about the earthquake, and various interactive games about disaster prevention. A particular site or cluster of sites could be developed as a memorial remembering the victims of the 22 February quake and the impact on the city. A number of sites lend themselves to this, including places of strong symbolic importance: Cathedral Square, Latimer Square for its function as the triage centre during the rescue efforts, Hagley Park, which became a refuge for those escaping the city. There are also the sacred sites of PGC and CTV, which require special consideration in terms of their interpretation and appropriate and sensitive treatment. Further sites have the capacity to offer solace and a contemplative setting, as along the Avon River. Traditional memorials like the Washington Monument can have limitations in terms of the ways in which they engage visitors, as they tend to be figurative, depicting a recognizable element, meaning they have a narrow interpretation. They are also usually static objects, which don't encourage active engagement. They are generally things just for looking at. Contemporary memorial design is increasingly tending towards abstraction rather than figurative statues. The memorial to the martyrs of deportation in Paris by Georges Henri is recognised as a turning point towards abstract memorial design and the focus on experiential and emotional spaces. When you walk down into the memorial space, all of the surroundings of the city of Paris disappear, and the focus is on the individual's contemplation and experience of the site. Maya Lin's Vietnam Veterans Memorial is a well-known example of a memorial which focuses strongly on visitor experience, with the memorial being located below ground level, so that the visitors are conscious of their passage through the site and can see themselves reflected in the highly polished granite surface which bears the names of the dead. The Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin, designed by Peter Eisenman, is a further example of an experiential memorial. Walking amongst the stelae or concrete slabs, visitors feel a sense of unease as the ground plane is not flat. The experience encourages reflection on the Holocaust rather than simply providing the visitors with information. At Gibellina in Italy, which experienced a 6.8 magnitude quake in 1968, artist Alberto Buri created a memorial which covered the entire village in concrete. The village had been abandoned after the earthquake, and the Il Crato, the crack, memorial creates an eerie ghost of the street and building pattern. The memorial has an enigmatic sense that encourages imaginative contemplation of the event. As part of the vision for the 21st century city, Christchurch has the potential to make a major contribution to the nature of memorial design. Rather than adopting a conventional, cliched or outdated approach, Christchurch can aspire to the creation of a democratic, inclusive and expressive means of remembering. As part of this, a comprehensive process of consultation needs to underpin the careful translation of the community's aspirations into an elegant, memorable and world-class memorial expression. Competitions are an effective way of generating fresh and exciting design ideas, such as the memorial design competitions for the Ground Zero Memorial and the Pentagon Memorial. While in the past, memorial design was focused upon the idea that a memorial was a singular sculptural form, contemporary approaches embrace expressions which are more fluid in time and space. That is to say, the memorial might change over time. As people add to it, it grows vegetation. Or even as in the case of one Jochen Goetz and Esther Shaliv's Holocaust Memorial, it could sink into the ground and disappear. A memorial could also extend beyond a particular site so that it becomes a sequential, multi-part memorial, perhaps associated with a walk, the river, or other unifying element. A quick and hasty response might later be regretted. This memorial was erected only 1 year after Hurricane Katrina and built over 5 days by the television program Extreme Makeover Home Edition. It exhibits poor design in terms of being an assemblage of simplistic and cliched elements, such as the stylized wave and glass box containing debris. There is a need to embrace spontaneous memorialization. Until we have a formal memorial or memorials, the grassroots temporary memorials are vital as part of remembering. Temporariness is challenging in the context of memory, but there are ways of addressing this phase as well. At Ground Zero, the ephemera left on site was collected and catalogued and will eventually form part of the repository and archive for the event. At the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the tributes that are left are gathered up and archived. A ready-made memorial may form an interim or even permanent means of remembering, such as the cross that emerged from the ruins of the World Trade Center. Elements like the empty plinths where statues have fallen express their own poignancy, as is the case with some of the fallen statues in Christchurch. Looking at the time taken to develop some of the best memorials in the world is a good reminder of the need to take a considered approach to developing an earthquake memorial for Christchurch. The memorial at Ground Zero, for example, only recently opened on the 10th anniversary of the attacks on the Twin Towers. Designed by Michael Arad and Peter Walker, the design was the result of a 2-stage design competition. Maya Lin's Vietnam Veterans Memorial was also the result of a competition. At the time of the competition, Lin was a young architecture student and produced a fresh and innovative idea for the memorial, a site which has become well known as one of the most moving and memorable memorials. The Gibellina Earthquake Memorial took 13 years to develop, resulting in an unusual and striking response. It took Kobe 7 years to develop the Earthquake Memorial Museum and Disaster Reduction and Human Renovation Institution. Finally, these are the issues that we need to keep in mind to ensure that the Earthquake Memorial reaches its full potential, engages with the dynamics of time, and avoids the consequences of a hasty response. Good memorials take time.